So this morning, we don't have a gospel reading, as you've seen. We are focusing on Samuel from the Old Testament. And I have decided to read quite a substantial portion of this story, so relax, get yourselves comfortable, take a deep breath, and put yourself in a mode of story time. The story of David is going to come up again for us in the fall. And this is a story it's got a lot in it. So we're going to focus on part of that today. So make yourselves comfortable as I invite you to listen to the story of David. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. And there came out of the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, so super huge. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had greaves of bronze on his legs and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And his shield bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "Today I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man that may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. David rose early in the morning, left someone in charge of the sheep, and took provisions and went as Jesse his father had commanded him. He came to the encampment as the army was going forth to the battle line, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, ran to the ranks, and went to greet his brothers. As they talked with him, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistine and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine and fight with him, for you are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and wherever a lion or bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this Philistine shall be like one of them, since he had defied the armies of the living God." David said, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped Saul's sword over the armor, and he tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot walk with these, for I am not used to them." So David removed them. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi, from the valley, and put them in his shepherd's bag, in the pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. The Philistine came on and drew near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the wild animals of the field." But David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God of Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. Please pray with me. Holy One, bless the reading of this story and the memory of your people to lead us to new understanding and wisdom and guidance of you in our lives. Amen. Oh, David. If you're looking for some dramatic, scandalous summer reading, I highly suggest you check out 1st and 2nd Samuel. This is a story, y'all. When we were talking about this story in our worship planning with Diane and Lisa and Felipe and myself, we all agreed that that soap operas and telenovelas have nothing on David. Our buddy David is a rich and complex character that represents both the best of his people, the ideal person that God would call, and also the worst in humanity. David runs the gamut from delivering his people from danger to delivering Bathsheba's husband to the front lines so he could conveniently be killed. David is both a sinner and a saint. When we look at David as a character, as a key to understanding what his people valued, how they thought, what they celebrated, how they mourned, and when they rejoiced, we can better understand how real and messy our relationship with God can be. David can also be our key to understanding how the people of the Hebrew Bible understood their relationship with God. The wrathful God we think of in the Old Testament from the stories we've heard may not tell us as much about God as it did about the people that were telling the stories. From David's character, we see that his people value power, and they felt like they had a right to claim anything they wanted. They believed that if something bad happened to a person, they had sinned in some way and were deserving of that evil. And they believed that God would not ever completely desert them or abandon them for a just cause. David is also our key to understanding that God calls normal people who are amazing and wonderful and horrible screw-ups to very important tasks. No one God calls is perfect, and we see from the very beginning that while God's chosen people may not be safe from disaster, even David himself, forgiveness and redemption is always possible with God. God called David, a person who was bold and humble, thoughtful and passionate, a king and a murderer and a shepherd, a loving husband and adulterer, absolutely devoted to God, but not free from sin, and he was pretty much literally a royal mess. God called David to make his mark with a sling and a stone, to start his rise and push him on the path that God had planned. What is God calling you to take up and make your mark? As many of you know, I spent this last week and a half in St. Louis for our Presbyterian Church's 223rd General Assembly. It was a historic assembly. Though the headlines themselves are not really what made it historic in my mind, it was like there was something in the air. A change was coming. A change in mood and understanding that our church's call is to justice and that we should not sacrifice that call for material gain. The assembly voted overwhelmingly over and over again in favor of overtures that supported the rights and voices of indigenous populations and people of color here at home and the world over. The fact that they made these decisions is not remarkable in itself, but if you look back at the vote counts and percentages that these overtures passed by, and know anything about how close some of our Presbyterian decisions have been and how divided we have been on topics, this is historic. We passed overtures by 80 and 90% that were condemning human rights violations in Israel and Palestine. And only a few years ago, when we finally, after a decade-long struggle, passed divestment from HP, Caterpillar, and Motorola Solutions, because they were profiting from military equipment and from the Israeli occupation. That decision passed by 3 votes. So the fact that we had votes that were passing by only 3 people voting against them, and the rest of the assembly of over 600 commissioners from all over our denomination, from all over the country, is absolutely historic. And I couldn't help but compare that to my first General Assembly experience when this very presbytery sent me as a youth advisory delegate when I was only 18 years old to our General Assembly in 2004. The Israel-Palestine Mission Network that I now serve as vice moderator of hadn't even been created. That was one of the things we voted on at that assembly. At this assembly this year, every one of the over 10 overtures that we were advocating for that talked about things like being against the anti-BDS legislation, protecting our First Amendment rights, condemning the violence in Gaza and all of those people's deaths and imprisonment who we've been praying for in this very congregation. They all passed by 80 and 90%. I just have to say that again. I'm still on cloud 9 and kind of can't believe this happened. I woke up this morning, I just got back last night. I woke up this morning and was kind of still convinced that none of it had happened, and I really wasn't sure if I was actually preaching this morning. So, I remember walking into that assembly in 2004 and seeing the demonstrators holding pride flags, because at that point, clergy could not even marry same-sex couples. And we definitely did not have all of the letters that we do and that we recognize now rightfully in our LGBTQ+ community. I didn't even know what the pride flag was when I went to General Assembly. When I looked at the leadership on the stage back in 2004 and that sea of commissioners that I was sitting in, it was a monochromatic crowd, y'all. And it was dominated mostly by older white men. And we love you all. But some of the rest of us have some things to contribute as well. Now when you look at the leadership of the PCUSA, I believe it is finally starting to reflect what the kingdom of God actually looks like. When you look at that stage and that sea of commissioners, there are now young adults, people of color, women, and LGBTQ+ folks represented in our leadership. For the second General Assembly in a row, we have elected 2 women as co-moderators of the PCUSA. This year, we elected Cindy Coleman and Vilmarie Cintron Olivieri. Vilmarie is from Puerto Rico and led prayers and even some business of the General Assembly in her first language of Spanish. I was so proud to see us lift up this amazing Puerto Rican woman as one of our co-moderators, while we still know that our siblings in Puerto Rico are suffering and dying and have been too long ignored since the devastating hurricanes. The youth advisory delegates, who range in age from 18 to 25, took up a collection amongst themselves. This is something that is not a tradition. This is something they decided to do on their own. They took up a donation and raised over $1,500 Remember, these are high school students, college students, young people, probably without jobs. They split the donation and gave $535 to Presbyterian Disaster Assistance in honor of Cindy Coleman, to be distributed how it's needed. They gave $535 in honor of Bill Murray, to go specifically to Presbyterian Disaster Assistance efforts in Puerto Rico. And then they gave $535 to the Hands and Feet campaign in honor of our stated clerk, J. Herbert Nelson. The Hands and Feet campaign is a new initiative of the stated clerk to call us and remind us to seriously live out our duty to be the hands and feet of Jesus on this earth. In the middle of the week of the assembly, we had a march to the downtown jail in St. Louis, and the Presbyterian Church USA delivered over $47,000 to pay bail for people who are being held, who have not been convicted. They're being held on nonviolent offenses. This cash bail system keeps potentially innocent people from being members of a free and contributing society. If you don't have enough money to pay your bail, you languish in prison until your family is able to scrape that together to pay a bail bondsperson at exorbitant rates of interest, even though you have not been convicted of a crime and perhaps not even sentenced. This assembly was historic because I think we took seriously for the first time in a long time what it really means to be the Church of Jesus Christ. I believe this General Assembly was historic because for the first time in a long time, our church recognized how to take up its sling and stone. It took up our call to fight for justice for the oppressed, to seek reconciliation and forgiveness for our own past sins, and hear voices that have too long been silenced. Because when we say we believe in release for the captives, we finally meant it. When we say there is good news for the poor, we meant it. And when we say there is freedom for the oppressed, we meant it. Take up your sling and stone. Slay the Goliaths in our world of injustice and poverty, patriarchy and racism, xenophobia and transphobia. David was called to take up a sling and a stone against Goliath, a man who had insulted his people and his God, and who he had no rational reason to think he could defeat, other than God had called him to it. What has God called you to take up? What Goliath are you being called to fight? Child detention? Racist laws? Police brutality? The use of torture by governments? The HIV/AIDS crisis? The cash bail system? Climate change? The occupation and oppression of people of color? The Israeli blockade of Gaza? Hunger? Poverty? Homelessness? What will be your sling and stone? Planting olive trees? Letters and calls to your representatives? Educating your own friends and family? Opening a homeless shelter? Feeding the hungry? Visiting the prisoners? Taking water to the border? Taking money to the jail? Marching in the Pride Parade proudly wearing the label of church? Speaking out at a rally for immigrants regardless of the threats that are thrown? You may also think you are a royal hot mess like David. I definitely know I am some days. But God has called you to a purpose, to fight Goliath, to protect what is good and right in the world, to stand up for the oppressed, to protect the defenseless. David, the tiny shepherd boy, defeated the mighty, fully armored veteran warrior with a sling and a stone. Take up your sling and stone. Our Goliaths can be defeated too. When you hear the words of the Psalms of David, remember that he was no more holy or perfect than any of us. He was a lover and a fighter, a sinner and a hero, confident and completely terrified. I'm going to read the alternative psalm reading from Psalm 9 today, and I invite you to reflect on David's complex humanity and calling, and prayerfully consider where you would hear echoes of your own complex humanity and calling. I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart. I will tell of all your wonderful deeds. I will be glad and exult in you. I will sing praise to your name, O Most High. When my enemies turned back, they stumbled and perished before you. For you have maintained my just cause. You have sat on the throne giving righteous judgment. You have rebuked the nations. You have destroyed the wicked. You have blotted out their name forever and ever. The enemies have vanished in everlasting ruins. Their cities you have rooted out, and the very memory of them has perished. But the Lord sits enthroned forever. She has established her throne for judgment. She judges the world with righteousness. She judges the peoples with equity. The Lord is a stronghold for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. And those who know your name and put their trust in you, for you, O Lord, have not forsaken those who seek you. Sing praises to the Lord who dwells in Zion. Declare her deeds among the people, for she who avenges blood is mindful of them. She does not forget the cry of the afflicted. Be gracious to me, O Lord. See what I suffer from those who hate me. You are the one who lifts me up from the gates of death, so that I may recount all your praises, and in the gates of the daughter Zion rejoice in your deliverance. The nations have sunk in the pit that they made. In the net that they hid has their own foot been caught. The Lord herself has made herself known. She has executed judgment, and the wicked are snared in the work of their own hands. The wicked shall depart to Sheol, all the nations that forget God. For the needy shall not always be forgotten, nor the hope of the poor perish forever. Rise up, O Lord. Do not let mortals prevail. Let the nations be judged before you. Put them in fear, O Lord. Let the nations know that they are only human. Amen.